Welcome to the sharpest college football podcast, the Big Ten preview. Robert, before I tell you how beautiful it is in Newport Beach or bid you a good evening, I have to get into something that just really bugged me over the weekend. Yesterday, I was listening to what I consider to be a smart podcast. Their Big 12 preview, I know this is the Big 10, but I have to share this. This made me so angry. So these guys, smart guys, I think they're reasonably smart. They were talking about, hey, did anybody notice that Iowa State might have actually been helped by the gambling scandal? I'm going to hit the table. I'm so mad here. This is me talking now. A year ago, I said the same thing, Robert. Robert, I said this a year ago. Now the smart people are finally catching on. And did you notice? I guess this means Pat 40, maybe in 2 years from now, might do a look back and say, you know what, guys? You might not have noticed this. So just, I don't know. This is where I just say, tell everyone how smart the podcast is, and we were right again.
Yeah, it is cool, right? We do have a pretty good share of things we're head on, and that's one of them, right? We talked about that last year. Eventually someone's gonna say, like next year for the 2025 ACC preview, they're gonna be like, you know what? Pat Narduzzi might not be that good of a coach. I'm starting to think that, guys. I'm starting to think maybe not the greatest selection, but that's college football for you, right? Some people just follow trends blindly, and some people see things before they happen. I like to think, and again, we're not the only people. Other people have good insights as well, but I tend to think we do pick up on a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. Yeah.
I think highly of you. You're a good dude. Even for a Canadian, you're a good dude, which makes you a really good dude. And that's a horrible example. Sorry, the cat's out of the bag on Pat Narduzzi. Yeah. Maybe you were just trying to be funny. That was, if so, very well done. That was laughs all around. All right, the Big Ten. Today's guest, Isaiah Walker, at Walker I41. He previewed the conference with us last year. Isaiah, thank you for joining us. Good to have you back.
Thanks for having me back. I'm glad that it only took us 3 minutes in here to get into a Pat Narduzzi conversation.
Yeah, exactly. We were quicker here than the ACC preview, believe it or not. So, talking about the Big Ten today, and just for those of you who haven't put 3 and 3 together, this is an all Big Ten pod because I am a USC guy, a member of the Big Ten. Isaiah is a Purdue guy, a member of the Big Ten. Robert, an Oregon fan, also a new member of the Big Ten. So this conference is the granddaddy of them all, now that we've combined the remnants of the best of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. So with that, we will start our conference overview. First, we will revisit our predictions from last season. I didn't do so great in the conference title games, and I think this is by far my worst work, Penn State and Minnesota. I'll just move on and just say, Robert, you did better than me. You came close on Ohio State. Wisconsin was better than Minnesota, but far from perfect. And Isaiah, you swept it here. Iowa versus Michigan. You went a little chalky, and you did it.
Yeah, I hated it when I was picking it because I hated to go so chalky, but I felt good about Iowa because of their defense. And I didn't realize how unwatchable Iowa was going to be. But the Michigan thing was just like, Buck, you said Penn State. And then I was like, Penn State could get there if James Franklin could win a meaningful game. And they played 2 meaningful games. But that's where we ended up. And then Michigan goes and wins the whole thing.
Yep. Well done. Good prediction. Speaking of good predictions, let's see what the experts have to say about this year. So about a year ago, Stu Mandel of The Athletic said, I don't understand why Oregon wants to play in the Big Ten and go 6-6 every season. Sorry, Robert, you're going 6-6. That's what the experts say.
The books are shocked by this, too.
I didn't include that 3 months later he said, hey, Dan Lanning's on the verge of winning a national title. So must be nice to make a lot of money to have just horrible and contradictory opinions. Either of you know this movie? Or is this just where I can just say... Yeah, it's old man theater, I guess is what we're going to call this. Isaiah, you nodded like you might know.
I'm so bad with movie names, even though I know the meme and I know the scene, but it's like trying to ask me who the artist for a song is.
Okay,
and
Robert.
I won't be able to give it to you.
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, yes. The concept where he goes, it's set in 85, he goes back 30 years to 1955, and there's moments like this where he's obviously seen something. He says, hey, I've seen this one before. I bring this up because...
What show was it? Was it I Love Lucy? Or no?
No, it's a movie. It was a movie.
Oh, it was a movie. Oh, okay. No, because he's saying I've seen this one before. He's referring to a TV show.
I've got no idea.
Okay, I couldn't remember that either.
A while
not to spoil it. He might be talking about Illinois 2024. Not to spoil the podcast here, but so there's quite a few teams, I think, that basically there might be some changing of the tapestries or something. The program's the same. Few programs I just kept saying, boy, I've seen this before. So we'll bring this in from time to time as we go through some of the teams here. The other thing that will play a little role here. Either of you know what this activity is called?
Grooming.
Too highly
Well,
educated.
not that grooming, the other grooming.
Not grooming. The primate on the left is picking nits off of the primate on the right. So had to bring this in a couple times because there's a couple of teams that I think just stand above all the others, but I found some nits to pick on each of those. We'll bring this into play a couple times too as we preview the teams here.
There's a sizable group of people on Twitter that are going to be really disappointed that I couldn't interpret a monkey meme. That's an internal conversation for when I share this podcast with that group of people.
Apologies to them. Here's the glossary. If this is new to you, just stop, take a screen grab, throw it in your 2024 season workbook, and then just refer back to this later. Because I do refer to this throughout the previews. And speaking of which, here is an overview of the largest conference in college football today. Just some overall notes. Obviously, they had Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and USC. They eliminated divisional plays. One thing that sticks out to me is from last season, this group had 5 elite offenses and 7 elite defenses, so leans a little more towards the defensive side. Sneakily, a little dearth of elite quarterbacks this season. I didn't really realize this until I took a look. You look at my mouse over here. You look at this column. Not a lot of apex envy from other conferences, I think, when you look past the top 2. This is sneakily might struggle to pass the ball, especially with how good of a defensive conference this is. So with that, let's get to the team previews. We're going to do part 1 right now, just so you can tell, dear viewer and listener. We've divided this up into 2 parts, Eastern and Western half. Part 1 today is going to be the Eastern half. You can see basically from the easternmost or the westernmost of this is Northwestern. And then we just move eastward from there. And then part 2 will be basically from Illinois and westward.
The Big Ten West lives.
What's that?
The Big Ten West lives.
Yes.
If you put Oregon in the Big Ten West, you've just completely broken the concept of the
yeah. All right, first team I want to talk about in the East, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Boy, what a team last season. 4th best in offense by all my metrics. 4th best in defense. What's interesting, too, is in last season, they're actually behind 2 other Big Ten teams in offense and 3 other Big Ten teams in defense. Just speaking of what kind of just a banger conference this was last year. Your number 4 in offense and defense, they were the top team overall last season. New OC in Chip Kelly. I think Brian Hartline is still there. I think he's just back to probably like a co-OC title and coaching receivers. Interesting, and we'll refer back to this in a moment. They had an apex of 136 last season, and that was disappointing. Now, granted, McCord was not really awesome against Michigan, and his first 2 games really stunk, but he played really well in between. I don't know. It'd be interesting how that shakes out. They had a good offensive line last season. They returned most of that. They returned basically 40 of 50 possible starts. An elite defense last season. They actually have the highest improvement metric this year. They only have 4 road games. 2 of them are close to foregone conclusions. I don't see any circumstance under which they lose at Michigan State or Northwestern. Schedule is really favorable here. Season win total is 10.5. The over is getting a lot of play at -150. Big Ten champs is +155. All right, so here's one team that's definitely going to be in the title game, right? No. Here's my case against. I'm picking it right out of the gate here. Chip Kelly. Look at the team apex that he had at UCLA. Basically, he's got 110 is nice, but that's really not going to break any headlines. You've got 2 good quarterback seasons in 6 total there. Now, you had some learning curve here early for DTR, but just going back to the prior slide, 136 last season was disappointing. That would be record-breaking for Chip Kelly post-Oregon. Part 2 of why I'm concerned about this team. Look at Will Howard's apex by season. Tell me which one you think is what speaks most to what you think Will Howard really is. 58, 65, 119, or 85? I can tell you if Will Howard was a racehorse in an allowance race at Saratoga, I'd toss out the 119 and I would basically gauge his talent by the other three numbers. Moreover, these numbers right here, especially the 85, I'm going to skip ahead. I could probably put these out of order a little bit. He only played two defenses that had a defensive apex of 79 or better last season, Iowa State and Texas. Look who he plays this season. He goes against 6 opponents that had an apex of defensive apex of 79 or better. I think he's in for a bit of a culture shock, and his numbers stunk last season. Is it possible he's a better fit for Chip Kelly? Maybe not. Interesting, too. When Dante Moore left UCLA, what did he say? I don't know if I'm going to be developed as best as I could. Interesting. Highly recruited guy, much more highly recruited than Will Howard. They've recruited a lot, but they lose 70% of their Ryan from last season as well. Going back to their schedule, this stretch is brutal. If you've got a shaky quarterback, you're facing Iowa at Oregon, Nebraska, and Penn State. That is a tough stretch. That's not just you. I can see that stretch them not just losing not just one game. I could see like maybe the quarterback's confidence getting a little shattered. That is a tough stretch. I'm going to tell you, I think that they are fortunate that they get Nebraska at home. That is a mean defense. They're in year 2 under Tony White. I'll put it this way. I don't see over 10.5 as a play, especially if you're laying 150. Big Ten champs at plus 155 is just, I can't play that at all. Are they a good team? Yeah, but I've got questions. I've got a lot of small question marks along the offense. I think the defense will just be great. Jim Knowles has got it figured out now. So I guess, somewhere between Ohio State skeptic and truther. What do you think, Isaiah?
Yeah, it's so fascinating with Ohio State because the narrative around this team is so different from the vast majority of teams in college football because they're Ohio State, right? If you take the past 3 years of Ohio State football and you ask 99% of college football fans if they would consider that a unbelievable successful program, they would all say yes. But it's for the folks in Columbus, and I just got back from Columbus, it's uneasy because this is when last year was supposed to be win now. This year is really win now. So I will tell you, if we set the stats aside and we set the schedule aside and we just look straight at the state of the program, if this team without divisions is not playing in the Big Ten championship game, Ryan Day is not coaching next year. I actually feel quite confident in that. This team has to make the Big Ten championship game. I think they make the playoff if they make the championship game because that's telling me 11-1. They're going to make the playoff, right? But I agree with you, Buck. I think there's just this uneasy feel about where this program is at. Now, I think the one good thing is the past couple of years, it's been really consistent that Ryan Day kicks the snot out of everybody except for Michigan. And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but we have some question marks on Michigan this year. I look at that tough stretch in the middle of the schedule, and that Oregon game is going to be a blitz because you're going on the road to Oregon. Oregon knows what that game means. If you're Oregon and you win that game, you're going to Indy, more or less. You're really thankful you get that Nebraska game at home. It's homecoming in Columbus. That's going to be a tough ask for any team to go into Columbus on homecoming and win. It's going to be tough for a new quarterback to play against the Iowa defense, but it is Iowa. If you look at the history of Iowa playing in Columbus, it is not pretty. It's really not pretty. I think you've got some pieces here that help the quarterback situation. If you're not a believer in Will Howard, this running back room is absolutely stacked. Obviously, you've got Travion Henderson returning. He's going to be really good again. You've got Judkins coming in from Ole Miss. You've got that offensive line. They did struggle a little bit for as good as they were in general. They did have some moments where they struggled in run blocking, and that kind of showed itself in like the Penn State and the Notre Dame game where there was just no offense to be had. And I think that's where you expose the fact that McCord was a good, not great quarterback. He's not why they didn't beat Michigan, but so the question I think you have with Will Howard is he comes in, I think At worst, he will be a good, not great quarterback. Are you in a position now with the conference expanding, with no more divisions, but you're still playing Penn State and Michigan? So, from a functional standpoint, this schedule is harder than what Ohio State would have gotten before because you're adding Oregon
No,
in. And
in Nebraska.
that's a tough ask. Yeah. And even at home, Nebraska is going to be a vastly improved team.
Yeah.
So, you're asking a lot of this team. I look at that 10.5 number, and I'm with you in that, especially at 150, there's no value on playing that. Even if you think this team is penciled for 11-1 at worst in a Big Ten championship appearance, I don't know how you bet that number at 150, and I wouldn't play it. So I would say, from a betting perspective, if you're going to play anything under here, I think you play the under. I'm personally staying away from it because this is such a must-win season for Ohio State. And because Ryan Day hasn't really given me a reason to doubt them outside of that Michigan game, but man, I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm an Ohio State fan looking at this schedule.
Yeah, one thing I guess before I throw it to Robert, see Will Howard is totally capable of actually losing at Penn State, whereas the quarterbacks before. You agree with that?
Yeah, there's a couple interesting things about that, right? Because when you see the 10.5 over minus 150, what this is basically saying is, okay, they can lose to Oregon, but then we don't. What the books are saying is we don't see another loss on the schedule, and that's not true, right? I think Oregon traveling to Oregon, other side of the country, that could definitely be a loss. Nebraska at home the week after. I don't think there's a bye week in there. Watch out for that. Nebraska might actually be a secretly good team. Um, at Penn State, Penn State plays them close when they get to Penn State as well. And then you have Indiana. Indiana not looking to be amazing this year, but could be a scrappy team. You do have them at home though, and then Michigan at home as well. I think we make a lot of interesting points about this, right? And I think you capture it with when you say, and one point I love you have here is this disappointing QB play last season, 136 team apex, right? That number alone is insane, right? Literally any other team would kill for 136 apex. They'd be like, oh my god, this is the best quarterback season we've ever had from a quarterback. And Ohio State was like, yeah, that was underwhelming. We gotta get rid of that guy, right? They shipped him off to Syracuse. Poor guy. He basically a peak season that would get someone drafted in the NFL, and they're like, "You're going to Syracuse now, buddy." That's how insane that is. But the thing is, though, I don't think Will Howard is that much of an upgrade, right? Kansas State was not a particularly pass-heavy team. It's not like Will Howard has a couple of seasons where he threw for 4,000 yards, right? They were a pretty grinded-out defensive running team, right? Like they threw every once when they threw him and needed to, but I'm not like, oh man, remember that throw Will Howard made for like an 80-yard touch? I don't have any of those in my mind, right? That's the thing. It's really weird, right? And I thought they would have probably made a play for Dylan Gabriel, but they were just like, no, we don't want Dylan Gabriel. Okay. The thing is, though, it is interesting, though. The defense is good. I'm not sure what the offense is going to do under Chip Kelly. I'm not particularly sure why he's here, to be honest. There was nothing really wrong with the offense, right? And this is another part of the whole equation of some people say they're unsuccessful. It's you were like, 20 or 30 yards away from beating Michigan if you didn't have an interception there with a minute and a half left in the game. That game was functionally for the Big Ten championship game, for a berth in the playoff, and arguably, because Michigan won every other game, you can make the argument that game basically decided who went to the national title game, right? If Ohio State drives further down the field and they score, then Ohio State is in those games instead of Michigan. And the thing is, honestly, throughout the entire year, I had Ohio State as probably one of the top teams through all college football, along with Oregon State. Not Oregon State, Oregon. I had them as two of the top teams in the country. And it's very unfortunate that due to losses, Oregon obviously losing to Washington and Ohio State losing to Michigan, that we never got to see them in the playoffs. But that's not an issue this year. If Ohio State even gets to that level, and the thing is, you're saying like he has to go 11-1. I don't think that's true, right? I think at 10-2, Ohio State is actually better because then you don't have to play in the conference championship game, right? Let's say they lose to Oregon, and maybe they lose to a Nebraska or a Penn State, whatever. They're likely to play at least the number 2 team, and then or either the number 1 or number 2 team, depending on which one you think Ohio State is. If you think Ohio State's the 1 team, then they're playing the 2 team in Oregon. And then they're probably playing the 3 team, whichever one you think that's either Nebraska or Northwestern or Michigan. You could think it's Michigan too. But they're basically playing the number 2 and 3 teams. If they lose both of those games, and then obviously they're the number 1 team, but that doesn't matter for this analysis, right? They're 10-2. Their 2 losses are to 2 teams that are already in the playoff. They're going to be like the 10th seed. at 10-2, and they're going to get a pseudo bye by not having to play in the conference championship games. I don't think Ryan Day gets fired if he loses 2 games. I think you get to cash in under 10.5 if he does, though. But I don't think he gets fired. I think they're going to be like, if he doesn't win the playoff game, then he's in trouble. But it would probably be a game, and maybe even a home game in Ohio State, right? It's such a weird team. They're definitely one of the top teams. I think Ryan Day is still one of the top coaches in all of college football. This idea that he's going to be fired is they might fire him, that's fine. But like any other, if that happens, he's immediately going to be hired by insert SEC school here. Miami would, if Miami got rid of Mario Cristobal. There's so many schools that would just immediately hire him if he was gone, right? I view that as the mark of should you fire your coach, right? And this is true in the NFL as well. If you say, okay, I'm going to fire this guy, if you know that there's a mile-long line of people right behind you saying we're going to hire him, you shouldn't fire him. If people are going to immediately hire the guy you just fired, you probably shouldn't fire him. This is the thing. I think this is an interesting team. I think, honestly, they have been basically hurt by the existence of the Big Ten West. Literally just the existence of it, because they don't get to go play in the championship game. And then again, they almost took down Georgia. Which won the championship game 2 years ago. They were, I think, the worst field goal attempt ever away from... It was horrible. It was at the stroke of midnight. That was probably one of the worst field goal attempts I've ever seen in my entire life. Had that not been the worst field goal attempt ever, they could have won a national championship, right? This is the thing. Ohio State keeps getting really unlucky bounces. I think they might be slightly worse this year. They lost a lot of Ryan, but that's just called Marvin Harrison Jr. That's okay. But they keep Buka. It's interesting. This team is good. I think this team might be worse than last year, but they may actually have a better season in terms of final outcome, if I had to hazard a guess.
Yeah.
They do get a bye week after the Oregon game.
Okay, that's not too bad.
That helps.
Yeah.
I think I do agree with you on especially it's always tough to measure the temperature of a coach's seat, because obviously fans are irrational. Fans wanted Ryan Day fired the second he lost to Michigan for the first time, right? Because Ohio State fans just weren't used to seeing that. And it's harder for a fan in the moment to justify, wait a minute, we lost to a really good team on the road. That's actually not the end of the world. I will say the one thing that I would like to see from this team and this coaching staff is I'd like to see more aggressiveness. I want to see this team throw punches and go, you know what? We have one of the most talented rosters in college football from just about every position we're throwing out there, and we're going to play like it. Because I'm thinking back to that Michigan game, because like you said, they did get some unlucky bounces. They were, sure, a couple passes and that pick away from maybe winning that game. But at the same time, they had another chance to drive that field late in the game with 3 or 4 minutes left, and they punted. And you've got an interim head coach on the other side who's going for it every 4th down. And when I go back to those Urban Meyer games, the reason Ohio State owned Michigan under Urban Meyer was because Urban Meyer, that game was the only game that mattered to them, and he coached like it. Like every single punch they were going to throw in that game was coming from Ohio State. And so they created their own luck, right? Because they were trying to make every situation favor them. So that's what I want to see from Ryan Day, right? If you lose a game, you lose at Oregon, so be it. You get upset maybe by a perfectly fine team, whether it's a Nebraska or a Penn State or something, so be it. But go down fighting in this one, right? Flex this talent, get yourself into the playoff, and then you see what there is from there.
Yep. Agree with that. All right. We move on to the Michigan Wolverines. Boy, I'm just going to say your guess is as good as mine. First season under Sharon Moore. Also new offensive and defensive coordinators. New starting quarterback Alex Orji, who I think's thrown like maybe 3 passes. The offensive line completely cleaned out. Read in all of the experience and improvement metrics here. They only retain 42% of their Ryan. That week 4 game against USC is on CBS. Very happy about that personally. There's, aside from just the obvious, like basically we have no idea. I think the one thing I do have an idea on is with a new head coach and a new quarterback, I think that you've got significant luck last season, and that's almost bound to regress from last season. Saturday I was thinking, God, David Shaw, like they didn't miss a beat when Harbaugh left Stanford. That roster situation was completely different. Shaw took over just an absolutely loaded team, and he had good for Stanford receivers, you'd say, guys named like Cody and Kobe, and you had Andrew Luck. You had just a loaded offensive line and tight end room. I don't think you have that here. I think there's a lot more of a build that needs to happen, and I need to be convinced of Sharon Moore. He did a good job, but man, he took over an ideal program. I don't know if he'll be like another Larry Coker. This is show me from the start. I have no idea. I'm not taking him as Big Ten champs. I could see him winning anywhere from like literally 6 to 10 games. So the nine's in that range, but I'm not touching this at all. What about you, Robert? You're nodding with me.
Yeah, that's the thing. The thing about this one is that there are expectations just all over the map. I could see this team surviving at somewhat of its level last year, scraping out 10-ish wins. And that's generally what the books are pricing in, right? I think they're like 50-50 to make the college football playoff. For that to happen, you basically need to scrape out last season, right? That's okay, we lose to Oregon and Ohio State, but then we win everything else. We beat USC, we beat Texas, we beat Washington,
Yeah.
that's fine. I don't view it as I think that's the ceiling for this team, like the 10-2 ceiling, kind of like the quote unquote the Penn State special, where we beat all the teams we're supposed to beat and then we lose to the teams we're supposed to lose to, right? I think that's the ceiling for this team. I see significant downside risk, right? You've got Texas. We're just assuming Texas is bad for this, but then we're also assuming Texas is good. I don't know where they're two. I guess that's their third loss from the over/under. But then you've also got USC. I actually think USC is going to be pretty good. We don't know what Washington is going to be. You're visiting them. You've got Oregon, and then you've got Ohio State, right? So hard to peg this team, right? This team is not one of the top teams in college football. Definitely not. You cannot say that. This is not last year's Michigan team. They've definitely lost a step, and that's not Sharon Moore's fault, obviously, right? Harbaugh left. A lot of people left for a lot of different reasons, one of which was the NFL draft. They got cleaned out a lot on that. Now, the one nice thing was that a lot of their defense did survive. A lot more specifically, they weren't in a position to declare for the NFL draft is probably more accurate. And obviously, a lot of their offense was NFL ready. Blake Corum, Jim McCarthy, I think it was Romeo Wilson. He was the wide receiver. They lost so much to the NFL draft, and obviously their coach, the NFL draft as well. I think he took a bunch of coaches with him. So there is a lot of stuff lost, right? I don't think you can just grab Alex Orji, who I think was on. Was he on their team or was he a transfer portal? I think it was transfer portal, right?
Yes.
No, he was on the team last
He
year.
was on,
Oh,
he was
okay.
on the team last year. He
Okay.
got some time play.
Okay, yeah, he just got the garbage times. I don't think you can
And
just take.
he got some mobile play. They went to him a little bit on run
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's mobile.
Yeah, I don't think you could just take him, shove him in there, patch together an offensive line, and then just hope for the best. That seems, especially when you lose so much, and people who had built so much at that program, I think there has to be a regression. The question now is whether or not this is going to be a permanent regression for Michigan, or whether or not this is just going to be a temporary, oh, okay, we have a couple of down years, and then we're right back up, right? I think that the 9 wins is like the absolute ceiling. Like the 10-2 season is the absolute ceiling. I think there's a much higher risk that the bottom falls out, right? And that this team starts losing. They lose to Texas. They lose to USC. They could lose to Washington, right? And we don't know what Jed Fish is going to look like in mid-season form there at Washington. They're going to have Will Rogers, right? They have Oregon. They're going to go visit Indiana, right? That may not be a fun experience, right? And then also at Ohio State at the end of the season, right? There could be 5-6 losses on this schedule. There's probably not a 7th loss, but like this team could be fighting for a bowl near the end of the season.
Yeah. Isaiah, let me kick it over to you in this fashion. So I see them as well more than a field goal dog to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. I see them less capable of pulling off an upset in one of those three than they will. How do I say? It's more likely that they would be upset in one of the other 9. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, that's. I think you hit it right on the nose there. Because again, we think of everything in terms of comparative plays. Like this is still Michigan, so you've got the benefits of the infrastructure that comes with being Michigan, but we take a step back from the fact that this is Michigan. Even if you think, okay, Jim Harbaugh can leave and we'll be just fine. Well, you didn't just lose Jim Harbaugh. You lost the defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, he's gone. You lost 13 players to the NFL, including your quarterback. And even if you want to go and say Jay McCarthy was just the world's greatest game manager, you're still losing the world's greatest game manager.
Yep.
And I'm not necessarily saying that, but you're losing that. You lose Blake Corum. Now you get Donovan Edwards back, but Corum's a huge weapon. You lost your best wide receivers. And then also, we're talking about Texas, USC, Washington, Oregon, Ohio State. Anybody notice who they're playing week 1? That's not necessarily a run in there and win 49-0 week 1 game, especially considering the past couple of years Michigan's non-conference has consisted of asking a lot from Sharon Moore. And I want to give him credit because he coached a win at Penn State. He coached a win against Ohio State. I don't really care what he did for the first 3 games because, again, I think you could have given the press box coordinator the reins and he could have beaten those 3 teams. But the sample size on Moore is small. I admire during that Ohio State game that he was willing to coach. That's the game of the year. Going for it on 4th down, playing aggressive. He showed me that he knows what they got to do in the games that matter, but you just lost so much here. And the other thing I'm looking at with this team, that plus 600 number for Big Ten champ, that's so off.
No.
They're not a plus 600 team to win this conference. Not with that schedule, not with what they lost. And even if you think that they'll be a pretty good, not great team, that's not plus 600.
Yeah.
So if you ask me what I'm playing, I am actually playing the under 9 point. If you get, depending on what you get, 9.59, I am playing that. I like the number. I think that, again, even if this is a pretty good team, I think the schedule is just so full of landmines that there's value in this. And the other thing I like because of that plus 600 number is I think that's telling me that Vegas might not necessarily have tuned in that this team may not be as good as people want them to be. So I'm going to be looking at that Fresno State game. I'm going to be looking at maybe that Minnesota game and seeing what the spreads are, because if they're going to give Michigan a big inflated line against Fresno State, I'm going to take Fresno State. I'm going to try to fade the spreads on Michigan until we figure out what this team is.
Yeah, I know you're a huge PJ Fleck fan, so that totally makes sense. What's interesting, too, is they're one of the teams, I don't know how many, they face Oregon and Ohio State. If you think it seems likely they lose both, you've got to totally run the table and hope like weird stuff happens just to even get in the conference title game. I think that 600 should be closer to like 1,200. Yeah?
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't understand where that number is coming from. It's got to be a respect for the fact that they're defending national champions. But great for you. You've got that trophy. Nobody can ever take that away from you. But it's 2024, and the Texas Longhorns and the USC Trojans and the Oregon Ducks don't care about that trophy.
Yeah, the other weird thing, and this only goes one direction. If the NCAA does rule and says, you're ineligible for this postseason, that could just tank the whole season too. And that, again, that only goes one way. I know they usually don't work that quickly, but who knows? The NCAA, you never know.
Yeah, I'm scared. I'll be honest, the more I watch this thing, I'm really skeptical that it really does go anywhere. But do I think that they cheated? Yeah. But do I also think that just about every other team in college sports is cheating at the top? Probably. And if you want to be honest with what the NCAA is and what the NCAA does, they're not going after Michigan. They're going after Montana State Community College. They're not going after Michigan.
Fair. Yeah, fair point. All right. So after you talk about the Big Two in the East, who else is next? Of course, it's Penn State. In their last 4 of their last 7 seasons, they've had exactly 2 conference losses. It's just well documented by now. The other 3, they had more than 2. It's just the story is just we've seen this story before. New offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki was really good with Lance Leipold at Kansas, and he actually was with Leipold at Buffalo. Again, I've really liked basically every OC hire that Franklin has ever made at Penn State. The problem isn't the hire. The problem is he doesn't let them do what they're supposed to do. If there's upside this year, it's, Drew Aller just faced a murderer's row last year of rough pass defenses. I don't know if I'd say he stunk, but he wasn't really good. But it's half of his schedule was just brutal in terms of pass defenses. Maybe there's some upside there. The other thing too is Aller doesn't strike me as athletic as Jason Bean or Jalen Daniels, so that could be interesting to see how that gets navigated. Plus, can Kotelnicki even do what he wants to do? Defensively, they were the best by my metrics last season. Their improvement metric is actually very high again, so this should be another really good defensive team. This almost feels like they're gravitating towards being the Iowa of the East, but more competent. The total's 10.5. I think the under makes sense there. It's taken a lot of money. The Big Ten champs at plus 500 is no thank you. The graphic at the bottom, I've seen this one before. I think maybe they can beat Ohio State, but I think that they'll find a way to lose at least one or two other ones. And I think they're on the outside looking in the conference title game. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a team that could lose more than obviously they're allotted 2 losses per season, right? This is the thing, right? People are like, oh, they only ever lose 2 games. Well, yeah, because they only ever play 2 good teams, right? They only ever play Ohio State and Michigan because they have to play Ohio State and Michigan, and then that's it, right? The rest of the Big Ten East is generally not great, and they don't play particularly tough out of non-conference, so that's it. There's your ceiling. There's your floor, right? This year, you have USC and Ohio State, so there's your candidates right there for 2 losses. Then you go down the list. Wisconsin, Washington, This is not. There is a chance that they could lose more than 2, but there's a chance they could just get that exact 10-2 again. It's really questionable about Drew Aller, right? There's a lot of hype for him last season. He wasn't horrible. He had some good moments. He had some bad moments, and then some spring practice stuff. He's definitely had some WTF moments. But again, the defense is pretty good. This should be one of the top teams in the country. I still do betting on this team because it's definitely James Franklin definitely knows what the spread is, because there's a lot of times when he didn't need to cover a spread and he covered a spread anyways. I definitely like betting on this team in garbage games, so definitely I'm going to have the minus. I think it's 10.5 against West Virginia. That seems kind of nice. But Penn State usually, it's like the definition of a good but not great team, right? They're better than all the other teams, but they're not as good as the top teams, right? And maybe they luck out and they only lose to USC and Ohio State and sweep the rest, and Washington and Wisconsin just have down years, and then they're 10-2 again. This is a team that screams to me like I'm not sure what their odds are. Let me check what their odds. What are their odds to win? When Isaiah talks, I'll find their odds to make the playoffs. But this is a team that screams to me 10-2, 11th seed in the playoffs. That's my take on it. I think this is a team that kind of squeaks in. Penn State minus 140. That's the line I don't want to touch. If that was plus 200, I'd be like, sure. But at minus 140, that's a little much. But that's the line for me, right? I don't want to touch that. That's a little too high. Because, again, you might have to compete with Oregon. You might have to compete with potentially Michigan, potentially Ohio State, right? Potentially USC, potentially even like a Nebraska or something, right? That's a kind of a log jam there, right? And those teams might have more impressive wins than you. So I wouldn't want to. That minus 140 is a bit too much for me. But this is a team that I could see if they have a 10-2 season, and if other teams get some bad losses somewhere, this team squeaks in to the playoff as the 11th seed. That's what I can see.
I thought that they might be a little at risk at West Virginia, but I looked and that's a noon Eastern time, so they catch a huge break there. If that was a primetime game, that would be. It's a good game to watch, but if that was primetime, that would be absolutely do not miss this at all. Maybe just for a quarter, but that would be must watch. Yeah, and I see you nodding, Isaiah. Were you have the same idea? Think that like that plus 500 is silly, and the only way there's no way to bet the season totals.
I don't see how you can. First of all, I don't see how you can set this team at plus 500 when the prevailing narrative and all of the context for Penn State is they can't win. They get 2 games that matter every year, and they lose both of them. I like Josh Pate. I listen to Josh Pate's podcast and everything, but I hate his Penn State rant because he does it every year. And it's always about how James Franklin is so unfairly judged because he's the only program in the country where you have to beat Michigan and Ohio State. And if you don't do that, you're a failure, blah, blah, blah. And that's not what anybody is asking for. I'm
How about
not
or
asking you.
instead of and?
I'm not asking you to beat Michigan and Ohio State every single year. I'm asking you to do it more than once ever.
Yeah.
I think we have forgotten that Penn State with James Franklin has won the Big Ten Conference exactly one time, and it's because Ohio State couldn't punt the football. That's it. They got the luckiest break against Ohio State at home and won by one score.
Yep.
And that's the only time they've beaten Ohio State. So it's, yeah, again, for 90% of college football, would you take James Franklin? Yeah, you better believe you would. But this is Penn State. Shouldn't Penn I think of when I think of iconic college football programs, Penn State is one of them. And I don't like this idea that the 10-2 thing is okay. And then, by the way, also they got a third game last year that mattered in the Peach Bowl, and they got obliterated. So I just, it rubs me the wrong way that people want to give him a pass because of the Ohio State and Michigan thing. But if you're mad at that as a Penn State fan, as James Franklin, you've got that opening because you don't have Ohio State and Michigan again this year. Now you have Ohio State at home and you have USC. The rest of the schedule does have some tricky spots at Wisconsin. Never an easy place to play, but they've won there multiple times under James Franklin. We don't necessarily know what Washington's going to be, but they're at home. And to be completely honest, the rest of the schedule does not scare me at all. They get a bye week in between Bowling Green and Kent State,
Well,
which is just the weirdest spot to have a bye week. But
back
the
to back.
rest of it,
That's why.
yeah. Illinois at home does not scare me. UCLA at home doesn't scare me. Sure, would it be really funny for my Purdue team to lay a spanking on Penn State in one of those, like, what the heck happened in West Lafayette games? Sure, but I don't think it's going to happen. At Minnesota, you should win that. You really should.
Yeah.
And Maryland at home, I just don't see landmines there. So it's, hey, James Franklin, if you're mad at this narrative, here's your chance. Your defense is going to be really good. You've got a really strong running back room. Aller good? I don't know. I think I feel like him the same way I feel with with Will Howard. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's going to be a quarterback that wins you games like by himself, but that's why you got this defense, right? So come out here and show me that win the game you're supposed to win, which you've done up to this point. James Franklin has done that. I look at that minus 165 on the under, and if you're giving me plus money on a number, now I'm not taking 10.5. At some point I had seen 9.5. If it's at 10.5 now, I'm not taking it. If you could get 9.5, I would consider taking a light play on that over. But I'm not taking 10.5 because then you gotta, again, you're asking him to win one of those two games that really matters, and that just makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, very fair. Here's what's, as you spoke to that, I think I might figure out why they're just, that plus 500 seems low at first blush. I did say I could see Will Howard being the guy that can lose in state college. I can see that. So if you just say they win that, now you can lose a USC game and still be in a great position to make the conference title game. And then you're going to have a tiebreaker over Ohio State. It's not the craziest path in the world. I'm definitely not going to bet it, but I could, if you put a gun to my head and say bet 6 of these out of the 18, they'd make the 6.
It's a great prove it spot, and I like that for a program. And I think a lot of Big Ten teams have this kind of put up or shut up thing, right? The divisions are gone now, right? You get the draw you get, and the only thing you have to worry about is winning games. It does not matter what the rest of the conference does if you win your games. You want to make a push, James Franklin? You got the schedule to do it. Because, again, outside of those two Ohio State and USC games, Penn State should be favored in all of these. Even at Wisconsin, Penn State should be favored there.
Yep.
So it's in front of you, man.
Yep. All right. Isaiah called them an iconic program. So when you say iconic programs, I think of the Indiana Hoosiers, as everybody does. I still can't figure out why Kurt Signetti went here, but I'm not going to argue with it. Right out of the gate, huge coaching upgrade here. If you just look at the luck reversion from last season, which you should have with a competent quarterback now, you just add the 1.5 games of bad luck to last season, you're at 4 or 5 wins already. huge upgrades at the head coach and the coordinator positions. Upgrade at quarterback, Curtis Rourke, good Matt quarterback. Brandon Sorsby, not a good quarterback. They bring in Elijah Sarrett, I guess is how you pronounce his name. I had him 17th in Ryan last season. It was all Sun Belt at GMU last season. Signetti brought in 4 defensive starters from his GMU team, which was a good defense for 2 years in a row. I like that. I also like that he brought in a guy from ODU. Old Dominion was in the Sun Belt, is in the Sun Belt East. So Signetti's played against this guy twice that he brought in and thought enough of him to be at Indiana. They only have 4 road games. I think they're going to be favored in 2, maybe 3. I would probably have them favored in 3 of the 4 road games. I like them over the 5.5. Obviously not the Big Ten champs. I would have them. I could see them getting to 5 in their first 5 games. And Washington's rebuilding. Michigan State, come on. No offense, Purdue, and then you get them at home too in a rivalry game. I'll just say anything can happen in that game at the very least. I like this one a lot. I'm gonna run the numbers and do my exercises on the over 5.5. Good hire, and I think he's got a lot of pieces in place just to make it happen in year 1. What do you think, Isaiah?
Yeah, this is gonna hurt me. So before I say really good things about Indiana, I'm just gonna point out that this is the losingest program in the history of college football. Okay, got that out of the way. I'm on you here. This was a great hire. I don't know how they got him, but this was a fantastic hire, and he hits the ground running as soon as he gets to Bloomington. He's got good coordinators coming in. He's pulling in this talent. He has instantly upgraded just about every part of this roster. Now, it couldn't have gotten much worse from what Tom Allen left there. Tom Allen was the worst cheerleader in the history of cheerleaders. We make fun of all the time one of the bucket games where they were up like 3 at halftime. It was a terrible game. It was like 10-7 or something. And he's given like this, we're about to win the college football playoff pep talk at halftime. And then they just get plastered second half. I don't know what that guy was doing, but Signetti's got the resume. He's got the proven experience. James Madison was not a place that was built to be a top 25 team. He built that, coming from the FBS into the FCS and turning them into a legitimate FBS program. Can't say enough good things about him. And the other thing I think he does really well is he understands what you have to do to win at Indiana. Yep. This isn't a team that's going to come out here and just out-talent people. You're not going to out-talent Ohio State at Indiana. You're not going to out-talent Michigan, no matter how good this program gets under him. But he knows how to get players that work in his system, and he's done such a good job with the transfer portal. The other thing that he's really got going for him here is this schedule. First of all, I get a lot of people who rip me for this take, but I wish my team would do what Indiana did here. They were supposed to play Louisville. They called Louisville and they said, hey, we're not playing that game. And they schedule FCS Western Illinois. Guess what? If you're Indiana and you're not making the playoff, and I'm sorry, I'm giving you a lot of credit, Indiana fans here, so you got to stay with me. You're not making the college football playoff.
This year.
So why does it matter? Why does it matter if you play Western Illinois and Florida International and Charlotte? Nobody cares. You get those 3 wins in. It's year 1. I like them at UCLA. That's 4-0 out of the gate. Maryland's a toss-up game. They're playing at a practice field in Evanston, Illinois. And then who knows what? But like at that point, you could be bowl eligible. You could be 6-0 right there. Yes. The over has already hit, and then whatever happens in the rest of the season is gravy. And even with the Purdue game, whatever you think of what Purdue is, at least they get them in the last week. Yeah. So like you might have your bowl locked up, and then it's playing for the bucket, but the pressure's off you. I just think everything sets up for this team. The roster, the schedule, the coaching, and the number. The over 5.5 on Indiana is one of my best bets on the season. I love this. I see you have the under at minus 120. And if the over is plus money, you should go to your bank right now, take out a second mortgage, take out your 401k and put it on that over at plus money. Because I I don't see a way that this team does not make a bowl this season. I cannot fathom that. And then bowl in season 1 of the
Yeah.
new coaching staff at Indiana
Yeah.
after you take over what you took over, that's going to move the needle with
Yep.
recruiting, and
Yep.
you're set.
That's going to hurt for UK too, right?
Now I'm going to go over. I've got this big cabinet of liquor over there, and I'm going to go take a break here.
Are you familiar with the liquor cabinet? I have a feeling that you might be. Robert, I remember that we talked about Indiana and the futures. I think you were with me that this is a solid bet. Now Isaiah agrees. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm on as well. So just quick, I'll update the number. Over for Indiana is minus 140 on Bet365. I think I saw minus 145. So there is a bit of juice to the over, but again, minus 145 definitely not a horrible bet there either. No, I like the over here as well. I think Kurt Cignetti is a really good coach. Again, bringing up an FCS team up and then dominating, being one of the best teams in your conference when you weren't even in the conference, and then not being able to even compete, and then keeping that team together and angry week to week, even when you weren't eligibly allowed to win. Like, that's insane. That's such an insane job. And I think for Kurt Cignetti there, I think one of the reasons why you're able to entice him, if you're Indiana and you say, hey, look, like a lot of coaches, probably schools wouldn't hire someone from, say, functionally a D2 school from that conference, right? Michigan State obviously went to the Pac-12 or the remnants of the Pac-12 to get the coach from Oregon State. So I think basically he probably didn't get a lot of attention, right? I think he probably views this as a chance to get into the Big Ten with probably some long-term job security. Indiana obviously more of a basketball school than a football school. But I think maybe they might be trying to change that a little bit, right? They're like, okay, if we just invest a little bit of NIL money, get a good coach, we can. Because the thing is, like, when you look at this, they are positioned in the Midwest. Yeah, structural challenges to being from Indiana, but if you can overcome that and do some stuff, you can actually have a half decent program here in Indiana. There's definitely a lot of churn. A lot of the schools we've talked a lot in the last bit about Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, right? We're talking about some of the top schools in the Big Ten. After, like, and there's obviously a couple left, but then once you get past that, it gets real thin real fast, right? Then obviously maybe one or two more, but we're starting to talk about Maryland, Purdue, Northwestern. This is the thing, right? The bottom half of the Big Ten is very winnable, right? And if you go to Indiana and maybe if you get promised some NIL stuff, and they say we will give you NIL funding, maybe you could pick a down year and you could get third place in the conference and go to the college football playoff, right? This is the kind of with just a little bit of money, if you're that good of a coach, you can really stretch that, right? I really like this team. I think it's definitely bowl game. I think that watch out for this team late season, right? When this, like, obviously we're looking at the first 6 games, very winnable six games. Nebraska, less winnable. Washington could be winnable. You're bringing Washington to the other side of the country. At Michigan State, again, battle of two new Big Ten coaches. That could be two teams that are having really good years, right? Michigan, we have no idea what shape Michigan's going to be in, right? Michigan could have 5 wins at that point, right? They could be needing this win to get to a bowl game, right? At Ohio State, probably nothing, but Ohio State, we talked about, they may not be as good this year, right? That could be if you're getting like 30, 40 points, that's something you could put up, right? And then Purdue, sorry, not necessarily the worst thing, but right, this is the thing, right? I think Indiana can actually do some stuff this year. Yeah.
On that note, when was the last time Indiana football fans out there, not being a homer, not with the cream and crimson glasses on, when was the last time you can look at a schedule and say, I see at worst 10 games that we absolutely have a shot to win? Mm-hmm. Completely realistic, do not need a miracle. Maybe even 11 if you consider significant regression on what you think about with Michigan because you get them at home.
Yeah.
If I am being completely honest, in the absolute best case scenario of Indiana football this year, the only game on here I see them not realistically having a shot in is that Ohio State game.
Yeah. With all the questions about Michigan, if you just told me no, Indiana won that game, I'd be like, oh, but I wouldn't be like, no way. I could say, yeah, I could see that happening. We said Michigan's got a wide swath in terms of what their final path could be, and
And the
Indiana
history's
will be
on their
more
side
fully
there.
formed at that point.
They haven't beat Ohio State since the 80s, but they did beat Michigan in the COVID season.
That's
So
right.
One
Yeah.
thing
there's
I will
no,
say,
there's no risk in that.
one more thing I do want to say is that, and I'm not sure, maybe Buck has a similar anecdote to me, but there have been many times where my model has liked Indiana over the last couple of years. And they've usually let me down. Now people are going to be like, "Oh, that's model failure." I'm like, "No, that's your coach's bad failure, right?" That's the thing, right? Like if my model thing, and again, I'm not saying my model's infallible. It's not like the Pope or anything, but this is the thing, right? If my model keeps saying, "Hey, this team should be better. This team should be better. This team should be better." The fundamentals are saying it's better, and you keep underperforming that, you can't ignore the fact that, hey, maybe the coach and the coaching staff is the problem here. That
I
like, this team
really
might
don't
actually be
think
not as
you,
bad as the record shows.
I really don't think you can underestimate the amount of times that Tom Allen lost them games and Tom Allen's staff lost them games. It was just watching somebody who has fired up their first game of college football 25 and they set the difficulty to Heisman and they're running prevent defense on the first play of the game because they think it says prevent, that must mean it's really good at stopping things. Just the guy, and first of all, he came from high school. He was a high school football coach and they hired him to be the head coach of a Division I football program, which is so Indiana football. I cannot even explain it.
Well,
But
he was defensive coordinator for one season,
yeah,
and then Kevin Wilson was
unceremoniously
shown to
exit.
be, Kevin Wilson. All right, appreciate you taking one for the team and being honest about Indiana there. So
I'm
your
just
reward
so
is, we'll talk about your team, and I'll try to be nice. Ryan Walters did win 4 games. The defense kind of treaded water. This is interesting. They don't return a lot of starts from last year's team, but they have 2 MAC transfers, so they have a very experienced team in terms of their starters. Yeah, when I look at this, they didn't have a lot of experience last year in terms of like improvement or returning starters, and still they have a low improvement metric again. So you're closer to this than I am, Isaiah. It seems like last year was a year 0 from the defensive standpoint, where you just had, all right, just play this year, and then just fare thee well. I have no idea on the season wins or the Big Ten champs, but fill me in on that. Was this just like really just a year 0, especially on
it
defense?
was. I don't think people quite grasped that when Brom left, the cupboard was pretty bare. And I hold no, like, I know some Purdue fans are not happy with how that happened. I have no ill will towards the guy. He gave us some of the best years that we're going to see from this program, and probably in the past, basically since Tiller. That was great football. You play whatever you think about the Big Ten West, you make it to the Big Ten championship game. You just can't complain. You beat Tennessee in a bowl game, and you get to rub it in Rocky Top's face every time they complain about the officials. There's a lot of good stuff there. The one thing about the defense that was really interesting last year is it started out horrible, but it progressively got better. And it never got good, but you could see, I think a lot of it really was learning the scheme, because Walters is a defensive coach and he ran a really good defense at Illinois, but I think it's something that takes time to learn. So, like, you look at the early games, you get gashed by Fresno State, you get gashed by a mobile quarterback. Like, Syracuse really didn't do anything special other than the quarterback kept running on them. But then you look at some of the other games on the schedule, and again, a tough schedule, but they figured it out down the stretch. When you're playing that, they lose the Northwestern game, but the defense was perfectly fine in that game. The offense just struggled. The 2 wins they get in Big Ten play, or they got 3, but 2 of them, blowout against Minnesota, blowout against Illinois. And I think that's what I see this year, is that when this team wins, you're going to see the best version of this team. They're going to just be able to click offensively. And even though throughout the entire season, it's not going to be consistent because they're still working the roster, because they're still building up the depth, I don't think they're going to have the consistency that's needed to win multiple 50-50 games. But I think you are going to see that, like, classic Purdue football thing where they come out of nowhere against a game, whether it's the schedule's just ridiculous and they really need to stop doing this. What do you want from Ryan Walters? It's year 2 and you're playing Notre Dame and you're playing a power team on the road. What do you want from the guy? But I look at the homecoming game. You get Nebraska at home. They're not beating Wisconsin. They haven't beat Wisconsin in 20 years, and it's not happening this year. They're not beating Oregon. But maybe Penn State. I don't know. You never know. Like, nobody thought they were going to blitz Ohio State in 2018 either. It's tough to expect a lot from them. But the thing I will say is the roster is better than what I think the end of the season record is going to look like. And I really do think the schedule has a lot to do. If you give this team a stock standard schedule, I think they're looking at a bowl.
That seems fair. Just you look at, you've got 3 games there: Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. How many teams are going to beat just one of those? Like, you're so few teams combined. Those teams might just lose combined like 4 games. It
Yeah.
just
And Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's gonna be really good. We're not covering them.
Yeah.
I like them like top 5 this season. So
Yeah.
it's a tough ask. Just on I like that characterization. To improve, but not reflected in the one loss.
Yeah. So what I would tell Purdue fans and what I would tell people looking at this team is to not necessarily look at the record, because the record can be misleading. Look how they play games. Do they get blown out? Does the defense get more stops than it get? If they're losing, if they go to Camp Randall and they lose a 10-point game against Wisconsin, so be it. Look at the home games. Can they knock off? Can they get an upset against Nebraska? Or you get Northwestern at home. We're not really sure what to expect from Northwestern this year. You get Michigan State late in the season. Who knows what to expect? I've already said how high we could be on Indiana, but it's still a rivalry game, and it's a rivalry game that this team has dominated Indiana in the past in. So who knows what happens in that game? The potential for them, I will say, if they can get a couple wins, it's going to catch everybody by surprise. And maybe that's where you want to be. Maybe that's. I think Ryan Walters thrives in that. In that he's developed this like online rivalry with Bielema, which I love. I think that little. Maybe it isn't our year this year, but maybe it is, and you're not expecting it. So you know what? We'll see. I'm excited to see what they have, and I'm not going to get too mad at them because you're just asking a lot. The schedule gets a lot more manageable next year, and I think next year with his recruiting, which has been really good, I think next year is really when you want it to start paying off.
Seems fair. Yeah. Robert, anything more on Purdue? Are you gonna outguess the Purdue guy here?
No, I'm just gonna say that yeah, Purdue. This seems to be not great, right? It was not that great last year. I'm not expecting it to be great this year. Yeah, the thing is, you're now at a point when Michigan State and Indiana are now they're making improvements to their team, right? They've gotten rid of their coaches. They're making improvements. Obviously, it's the second season under Ryan Walters, but you did lose your coach. But at a certain point, you have to like say, okay, this isn't working, and you have to obviously Purdue's a basketball school, right? Purdue is fine. There's no problem with Purdue, right? But football-wise, there is a huge problem with Purdue, right? The problem is, do you just say, fine, we're just a basketball school, or do you try to compete in football? And I don't think Purdue particularly cares to compete in football. I think.
I don't know if I would agree that they don't care, but I would agree that it's harder to prioritize it. They have made significant investments in football, in the facilities, and the stadium just got renovated last year, and it's beautiful. They are trying to care about football. It's just a tough spot to be in with the way the conference has changed, and it's a bad. I think the worst thing that could have happened was to have the coach in year one last year and not this year, because you don't get the year one pass that some of the other coaches are going to get. You're expected to do more, but yet the schedule is harder than last year. Yeah, it's going to be, there's going to be some growing pains at the least. But that's putting it lightly.
Speaking of growing pains, it took Rutgers about 5 years to get back to respectable. I think they did get respectable last year, at least on one side of the ball. This whole thing to me comes down to, and I believed in Calic Monis last season. He totally stunk. Is the thesis that being reunited with Kirk Shiraka, is that, number one, an upgrade over Gavin Wimsatt? I can't see how it's not. Wimsatt was so bad. Does he get back to, he had 4 really good games under Shiraka. You've got They're one of the very few teams that is green in the experience and improvement metrics here on defense. The power rating was a little low, but they were sneaky good. I think this 72 is pretty fierce in terms of defensive apex. Maybe a little susceptible against the run. I think Shion will have that tightened up. You've got a really interesting 2-week swing here at Virginia Tech and Washington. I'd expect them to split those. I think that Virginia Tech's going to be good. I think Washington's going to struggle in a rebuild. I think 1-1 is what I'd expect there, and anything different is going to be really noteworthy. I think it's just as easy as they're just a passing game away from being a good team, and I don't know if I'm being overly optimistic. FanDuel doesn't quote. I guess you can't bet on Rutgers and these kind of things because they're in New Jersey, and New Jersey has weird rules. And I wasn't really dying to bet them anyways. So it all comes down to me is basically how much of a difference does Kaliakmanis make? What do you think, Robert?
I get Rutgers numbers apparently. The UK book Bet365 does not care about New Jersey law. So Rutgers is 100-1 to win the Big Ten, and the over under is 5.5, and that's shaded to the over actually. I think it's minus 160, minus 170. Let me just check that.
I saw 6.5, so maybe it changed to 5.5, but I did see 6.5.
Yeah, 5.5 minus 160. This is the thing, right? This team was like sneakily good last season. They played Michigan very competitively. They had a lot of good games last year. You get Howard and Akron, that's pretty great. That seems good, right? That seems like not a problem. Virginia Tech, okay, maybe they're good, but this is going to be the make or break game for Virginia Tech, right? Then you got Washington at Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA, USC, Minnesota, Maryland. Honestly, outside of USC and like Nebraska, this schedule really not very scary, right? This is one of the issues with we're getting rid of divisions and we're just going to have it open like this. But the problem is when you have such a big conference, you get a possibility where if they were to say then the math doesn't quite work out, but you can have this weird logjam where Rutgers is 10-2 and USC is 10-2, right? You can have weird log jams for the second, third, fourth, and fifth spot all at 10-2. And the problem is very few of them will have played each other, so you just are going to further and further tiebreakers. This team was really good. Their defense was really good. They could not do anything on offense, and I think hopefully this fixes it, right? Gavin Wimsatt was awful. That was really bad. But they didn't need to do much because they were able to win through not offense. But for Kaliakmanis, he was very hyped. He was very hyped last year. And I think that basically you're picking him up out of the bargain bin and you're like, hey, let's run this. He's probably better than what we have, and he probably will be, right? Especially if we have an offensive coordinator that got something out of him in the past. Hey, maybe this is a really good bargain. Maybe let's run with this. And I kind of think it is. Yeah, I can't say I hate this. I don't think this is bad at all.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that game at USC is on a Friday night. So if we throw that out, that's going to be on probably who does those Friday Big Ten?
It's right now. It's scheduled for Fox.
Okay, so if you throw that out,
Eastern time kickoff.
Yeah, they'll love that. If you throw that out, I see a lot of the second half of this schedule. I see a lot of Peacock. Does that seem fair, Isaiah?
Yep.
Yeah. What else you got on Rutgers? Anything?
You know what Kaliakmanis reminds me of? It's the MLB trade deadline right now, right? Kaliakmanis is the pitcher, the prospect that has really good numbers, but's having a rough season, and somebody picks him up off the DFA wire. You can't get worse than what you had last year at quarterback play. Unless you want to go over to Indiana and ask for Brendan Sorsby's number. It just can't get worse. And so even if he's not the guy that we thought he might be when he went into Penn State in his first start and actually was pretty decent, he's still going to be better. The other thing I look at with Rutgers is we are perfectly okay, everybody is, with looking at Iowa every year and saying, oh, they're just going to defense everybody to death and they'll be good. Why can't Rutgers do that? Yeah. Why can't Rutgers have a really good running back, which they do in Kyle Monangai, really good running back? Why can't they have a stellar defense, which they do, and just play what everybody thinks of when they think of Big Ten football? If you're getting 5.5 wins, I might make that a best bet to go over on that because I was already over on them on the 6.5. I look at the schedule. Howard and Akron are tomato cans. Congrats on those wins. Virginia Tech, my Purdue team won there last year. I'm going in on betting Virginia Tech again, and they'll probably let me down. So shout out to the one person who understands the running gag on that. But Washington, you get them at home. Who knows? And then that second half of the schedule, man.
Yeah.
UCLA, Minnesota at home, at Maryland, Illinois at home, at Michigan State.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there for win number 6.
And even if you're looking at Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin as probably not, you use those games to figure some of your stuff out against those better teams, and then you get those last 4. How does this team not make a bowl?
Literally, Calic Monis is just as bad as last, but they still won 6 games last season. What were they last year?
And then they won the bowl game. They went up against the Fighting Marios and won the bowl game.
Okay, there's the answer. How many Marios do we have in here? November Maryland. That's probably one. They get Burt. He's not Mario bad though. That's a big ask.
They get the car salesman.
There's a lot of pathways there, I'd say for sure.
Yeah, I think the numbers all point to that this was a good team despite the most important player on the team being awful. And basically everything is staying the same except for you've got what has to be an improvement at quarterback. And you've got a better schedule because there's no Ohio State, there's no Michigan on here. There's no Penn State either.
They catch a real break that way. Yeah.
I mean, this is set up for a Rutgers year. So, yeah, I'm going to make, whether it's 5.5 or 6.5, I'm going to make the Rutgers win total one of my best bets on the over.
I like it. All right. Less exciting and interesting to me is I wish we all knew, hey, Northwestern had a good season. I forgot they won 8 games. I guess they won their bowl game too. Jesus. They did miss both Ohio State and Michigan last year, so that's probably a little bit inflated. Remember, what's-his-name, Braun came in right before the season, so now he's got his own coordinators in there, which is probably a good step. More than probably not a good step is your quarterback is Mike Wright. Congratulations on that. Enjoy that. They had a good statistically pass defense last season, but the best passing teams they faced were Maryland, Duke, and Wisconsin. This is not really a murderer's row of murderer's rows when it comes to passing. This season, I'm interested in that week 2 game against Duke. I don't know what Duke is. We're starting over there, but I'm really interested in Mike Wright against Manny Diaz. I know that there's a lot of new defensive folks at Duke as well, but that's going to be my gauge for just, if Mike Wright struggles in that game, I think that this is going to be really rough for Northwestern. Season total is 4.5. The over is getting some play. I'm not really interested in playing that. I think that in the first season with new coordinators, I'm just wait and see. God bless you people who are actually laying money to back Mike Wright on over. I don't know. I'll just wait and see, but I'm not really interested in backing him. What about you, Robert?
Yeah, it's a really tough team to try to figure out, right? Last year, we were like, this team is going to be horrible. There's no chance for this team. This team is going to be one of the worst teams in college football. And they really surprised the upside, right? With not a lot of pieces, right? Apex got worse from last year. But this team found ways to win, right? And they did that against... This team wasn't like, oh, we're going to upset a good team. They just won. They beat teams that they should have beaten, right? They just kept winning games, right? When you look at the schedule, Miami of Ohio, that's actually a game I think they lost a couple of years ago, but that was obviously pre-new coach. I think they did lose that 2 years ago, I think.
They did. They did.
So these are games that, like, before they've lost, but now they actually, this is the new Northwesterners, that they just clean up games that they should win, right? And then that's what you want in a team, right? I like the over 4.5 a bit. Maybe I'm crazy. I grabbed it earlier in the season. Yeah, let me just see last year. Because, okay, they lost to Duke, but they should have lost to Duke. They beat UTEP again. That's a team that they should have beaten. They beat Minnesota in overtime. Yep. Howard. Yep. Again, they'd only narrowly beat Howard though. They beat Maryland, yep. They beat Wisconsin, and they beat Purdue, and they beat Illinois, right? And they play some of those teams again, right? Like, I see this team as, again, Miami, Ohio, Duke, Eastern Illinois. Those are three games, three teams they should probably beat, right? At Washington, don't know what's going to happen there. Wisconsin, that's a team they could beat. Purdue, a team they could beat. Illinois, a team they could beat, right? There is winnable games on this season. Is this team going to win anything? No. Are they going to win the Big Ten? No. But do I think they can get to 5 wins in a bowl game? 5 games with outside chance of a bowl game, yeah. So I'm taking the over 4.5.
Okay. Yeah, what's interesting too is like I was just looking at their schedule last year. The opposite of Mario, where Mario had a better power rating than 12 of the 13 opponents, and he went 7-6. He basically Braun's team was better than only 5 of his opponents from power ranking, and they win 8 games. So I think if there's some upside there, this guy might really have a clue. You're closer to them, Isaiah. What do you think?
Yeah, this is such a tough team to figure out this year. The first thing you have to do with Braun, regardless of what you think of this team, is you have to give him a whole heck of a lot of credit, because I don't know how many coaches can go into a program that is so thoroughly identified with their head coach that Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald was, with the way that Fitzgerald was fired right before the season starts and why, and still win. And the other thing about it was the first 3 games of the season were exactly what we expected from this Northwestern team. They got blitzed by Rutgers, they beat a bad UTEP team, and then they got blitzed by Duke. And then they were getting blitzed by Minnesota, and it looked like same old Northwestern.
There we go. Yeah,
and then about this. PJ Fleck just blew all of his propeller blades, and the boat sunk, and they come back from this 20-point deficit and win in overtime. And from that point on, when this Northwestern team was playing just about everybody, they were in their games, and they were winning when the statistics didn't necessarily support that they should be winning. They really probably shouldn't have won that Maryland game. I don't know how they went into it to Madison, and they won that game pretty handily. They got completely run over by I was at that Purdue game in Evanston. Purdue thoroughly outplayed them from everything except for Hudson Card, or actually I think it was the backup because I think Card was hurt at that point. Whoever was quarterback for Purdue threw 3 interceptions, and Northwestern wins 23-15, and then they win the 2-point game against Illinois. So you have to give them credit, because most coaches in that position in those games are not winning on margins like that. They're finding ways to lose those games. And even Fitzgerald was finding ways to lose those games in the last couple of years of his tenure.
Yep.
Now, I go into this year, and I'm the opposite on this team that Robert is. This might be the first one where I think me and Robert disagree. And the only reason I'm thinking that is not necessarily, I don't want to go into the season and say this team's going to be bad, because I really don't know. But the way I look at it is, I think a lot of what they did last year, can I ask them to replicate how many games they had with the statistics and the style of play and the matchups just do not explain how they won 8 games.
Yeah,
and I look at the schedule, Miami of Ohio, you could come right out and lose that game. You just don't know. That's a good MAC team, and they've lost to bad MAC teams in the past. You get the Duke team at home. Who knows what Duke is? You get Indiana. We think Indiana's going to be vastly improved. The other thing that I don't like about this is, again, the other side of that coin that Robert mentioned. There's a lot of winnable games, but there's a lot of losable games. No matter what you think of what Illinois might be, what Purdue might be, what Indiana might be, what Maryland might be, you can't go into this season with this roster saying those are games we really should win. And it especially sucks they don't even get Purdue at home, right? If you are looking at Purdue as the worst team in the conference, they don't even get them at home. So if the number is at 4.5, I probably have it as a don't play. Originally, when I wrote up my write-ups, I saw it at 5.5, and I was leaning a light play on the under. I can't bet that legally in Illinois, but I was looking at value on the under 5.5. I want to see this team have a second season
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're winning these close games with a roster that I really don't think should be winning. Now the defense will be good. Defense will be good again, even though the secondary lost quite a bit. But man, that quarterback situation here is really concerning. And the other thing too is they may have a good running back, but that offensive line production was not very good last year.
Yep.
And so if you're telling me shaky quarterback play against a schedule with a lot of losable games and a questionable offensive line, I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but Northwestern doesn't have a home stadium this year. The first couple games in Evanston are going to be played on the lakefront at their lacrosse stadium, which they've turned into an impromptu football stadium that looks worse than my high school football stadium's field.
A pop-up home field.
Basically, I don't know how they're going to fit anybody there. It's just not. I'm not kidding when I would rather play at my high school's field. It's on the lake too, so you're at the mercy of whatever the lake is doing on any given day. And then at the end of the season, starting with the Ohio State game and then the Illinois game, those two games are going to get played at Wrigley Field. And let me tell you, as somebody who went to a Purdue Northwestern football game at Wrigley Field, there's no Northwestern fans there. It's all like when they play Ohio State at Wrigley
Yeah.
Field, you're going to think like the Cardinals invaded or something. So I don't know. I think you're asking a lot of David Braun, and I'm not going to make judgments on his coaching tenure based on what they do this year.
Yeah.
But I just feel like this is asking a lot to get them back to a bowl game again.
It's just to be determined. I think that's fair. All right, Maryland. For all the talk that Taulia got, look at those apexes by season. He's basically like the high point of their quarterbacking, probably since Scott Milanovich, for those of us really old school guys. 115 apex, okay, nice season, but I don't know if he was really like that outstanding. Then I get this MJ Morris from NC State. Congratulations on his 53 apex. Good for you guys. They retain a lot of their Ryan from last season. The whole offensive line is cleaned out. The defense was like sneaky good last season. Should be the same. Good-ish. That game in Indiana is I think, sneaky tough. I've got my eye on that. That's going to be a fun one as somebody who's going to be back in Indiana. I've got him as a field goal plus dog in 5 of these last 6 here. MJ Morris versus these defense right here. Enjoy that, guys. Plus, there's Isaiah's famous Maryland after September.
Yes,
Not
October
exactly
Maryland.
peak Maryland. Could get really gruesome. I see the under for a good reason, taking action under 6.5. I'm not going to bet it, but at best it's a rebuild this season. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I'm never particularly high on Maryland. I don't think this is a good season to change that. There's been spots I've bet Maryland before. Usually, weirdly, spreads against Michigan. I like them against Michigan to cover the spread, but again, everybody was, oh, Talia, amazing quarterback, so good, but never, not the same kind of dominant quarterback play we were ever able to. People like, he's so good, but then I don't even think he was drafted. He may not even have been drafted. I think he was like an undrafted free agent. If this guy is that good, J. McCarthy went 12th or 11th or something. I don't remember exactly, but he went in the top 15. That guy, and you're saying this guy is so good he wasn't even drafted, not even first round, just not even drafted. Period. Right? They act like this guy was the entire heart and soul of the team. He's gone now. Now what are you gonna do? What's left of this team? Right? Okay, you saved most of your receivers. Cool. But the offensive line is gone. You got MJ Morris, who was definitely underwhelming last year at NC State. I don't know. This team weirdly is good at the beginning of the season and then weirdly is bad at the end of the season, right? And I could see something similar here, right? You've got Connecticut, you've got Michigan State. Okay, that one is a little iffier. Virginia, Villanova. Then you got Indiana. That one is going to be, that could be the turning point of the season there. But then you've got Northwestern, USC. Good luck. Minnesota, Oregon, Rutgers, Iowa, Penn State, right? This team could easily not make a bowl game, right? And this could be, in many ways, we could be seeing like a kind of realignment of the Big Ten, where Maryland used to be that kind of mid to upper tier team, right? Like just not at the Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State tier yet, but close, right? Where you could say, oh, maybe they're a couple pieces away, but they were never there. Because this team always put up underwhelming results, right? This team was always perennially 8-5, 7-5, right? They always underperformed. They always looked so good, but then when you got to the end of the season, they'd always start losing dumb games they should never have lost. And that's the Maryland we know, right? And the thing is, I think a lot of the reason why they even won those games in the first place was the quarterback, and the quarterback's gone now. So good luck, right? That's the level here, right? Like people were so high on this team because of Talia Tagovailoa. He's not there anymore. So what's the positive, right? The defense was okay, but not amazing. I'm low on this team. This is a team I think I'm going to enjoy fading all year. I'm not sure if I necessarily want the under 6.5. Not because I don't like it per se, but I think there's better bets. But if I was betting something on here, I'd be under 6.5.
Yeah.
It's funny that we're having this conversation about Maryland, because there's this Maryland burner on Twitter, and he's absolutely roasting anybody who suggests that this team is winning fewer than 9 games. And I'm not kidding you with that. And it's funny because one of my very good friends went to Maryland, and when I ask him about Maryland football, it's, oh, are they going to win 5 games? That'd be cool. Boy, I don't know. I want to know what this Terps burner is.
Mike Loxley on Twitter.
Yeah, the Mike Loxley burner. But yeah, Buck knows exactly where I stand on this Maryland team, and it's that if Maryland only played in September, this team would be in the college football playoff every year. But they don't only play in September because the month of October exists. And as soon as the month of October comes, they turn into a pumpkin. Like, you look at their schedule last year. It's looking great out of the schedule. You beat a bunch of bad teams: Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, Michigan State, Indiana. It's looking great, 5-0. Lose to Ohio State in Columbus, no big deal. There's no shame in that. You come home on homecoming, and you lay an egg against Illinois. You get a bye week. You go to Evanston, and you lay an egg against Northwestern. And it's October, Maryland again. You lose 51-15 to Penn State. You let Drew Aller put up 51 points.
Yeah.
And then somehow you go to Lincoln and you win 13-10 in a game that I thought Scott Frost must have been coaching. You put up a pretty good fight against Michigan, and then you beat Rutgers. So I just can't trust this team because the middle of the schedule exists. So yeah, if we look at September, UConn, Michigan State, at Virginia, and Villanova's an FCS team. You should be 4-0 at that point. If you are not 4-0 at that point, then you're really in trouble. But then you got to go to Indiana. Well, we know how we've said about Indiana. And then you get that Northwestern game. Who knows what they are? And then you're absolutely going to be an underdog in the last 6 games of the schedule. And multiple of those games are ones I'm not giving you a chance in. You're not beating. I'm not giving you a chance against USC. I'm not giving you a chance against Oregon, and I'm not giving you a chance against Penn State. And realistically, I'm probably not really giving you a chance against Iowa. So to get that 6.5 number, you basically have to be flawless out of the gate. You have to win at Indiana, and you really have to win the Northwestern game. So you have to be 6-0 going into October, or into the middle of October, and then hope that you can pick off Minnesota on the road, Rutgers, or somehow Iowa. And that is just asking way too much of Maryland for me. The quarterback play is such a huge downgrade from Talia being able to do everything. I like the run game. You got some wide receiver options. The one thing about the defense, too, is it was really good because it forced a lot of turnovers. But when you have a defense that thrives on forcing turnovers, you are asking for the chance of regression.
Yep.
Can you really force turnovers at the rate you did last year against Oregon, against USC? I'm not betting on that. So I like the under. If you're getting 6.5, I like the under on it. Maybe this team gets to 6-6 and squeaks into the whatever we're calling the Detroit Bowl now. But I can't see any rationale for betting on them to do better than that. So with that, I'll head back to Twitter and mute the word terrapins and terps so that burner's not in my mentions. Sorry, you're not going 10-2. You're
No.
just not.
Yeah, I second that. There could be just a sneakily that game at Virginia could be just a weird quarterback matchup that anything could happen with. Who knows? You've got whatever wild card Tony Elliott's going to play against whatever MJ Morse might be.
Also, we're making UConn jokes, but also UConn's not like a complete train wreck anymore. So it's not like you're playing an FCS team week 1.
Yeah. Speaking of complete train wrecks, last season Michigan State was. That was a rough season for them. I love the hire. Jonathan Smith comes from a little brother program to another little brother program. He brings Aiden Childs with him, who's a pretty big recruit. They're very high on him. The offense was just horrible, complete rebuild. He's done it before, starting over in a bad defense. He was a slow build at Oregon State. His first 3 seasons, he was 9-22, and then he improved to 25-13. So I'd expect something similar, especially in a tougher conference. Now he's in a better position recruiting wise, I think, in at Michigan State versus in Corvallis. This is just nuts, unfair, crazy. Ohio State at Oregon, Iowa, and Michigan. That's going to be 4 tough defenses, and then this is the classic not get your wind knocked out of you because you exhale against Indiana, and that's when you really just you lose all your wind. Season wins 5, sure, whatever. I have no idea what to expect in year 1. I think if anything, it's a slow build, but I'm not one that thinks it's really smart eventually to bet against Jonathan Smith. So this is just a watch and see for me, but that is a brutal stretch there. That middle third of the season is just watch the F out, man. What do you think, Isaiah?
However bad you may thought you had it at any point as an Oregon State fan, where your program was before Jonathan Smith came in, it is not this bad. You could not have scripted a worse disaster. After that miracle season that was basically just one running back doing everything for Michigan State, and we went on that tangent last year, and then everything falls apart. The only possible way for that to end was in the biggest disaster possible, and they found a way to do that, and Mel Tucker gets fired in just the worst possible way that we don't have to go into. And you're left with a program that has been completely devastated because not only was Tucker just not a good person, but he's also not a good coach. And his program has been gutted. And the morale in East Lansing could not have been lower. So the fans don't care. You're in this horrible, apathetic kind of environment. I like the Jonathan Smith hire, not just because he's a proven guy, but because, like you said, there are parallels here with Oregon State. Michigan State. It's the program that feels like they're in the shadow, but they shouldn't be, right? They want to be the program that people are thinking about when people think about Michigan. They have the resources here, and I would argue that at Michigan State you have better resources than you do at Oregon State, or you should, especially once you get this thing going. You certainly have an upgraded quarterback because they were a bottom 5 passing offense in 2023. The running game wasn't great. That was probably more of a line problem than it was the running game itself. You've got some wide receivers and some tight end targets. The defense is a problem. The defense has never been good under Mel Tucker, even in that 1 year where they were good. And so that side of the ball is going to be a complete rebuild. And there's no amount of transfers that you can bring in that's going to make that defense good in one season. It's going to be a bad defense. So basically what you're asking is for this new quarterback coming in from Oregon State and these bits and pieces of talent that they do have on the offensive side of the ball, minus the O-line, which is not good. to try and scrape together wins against this schedule, which, like you said, in the middle of that conference is just an absolute murderer's row. I'm not get you. I don't give. You don't have a chance against Ohio State. You don't have a chance against Oregon. I don't even think you have a chance against Iowa, really, because your defense somehow you're going to make them look good. And at some point, I expect Jonathan Smith to be really good at beating Michigan, but it's not going to happen this year.
Yeah, fair.
And then at that point in the season, how much are your players into it?
Yeah.
Especially if you get to that really brutal stretch and then you go and you get your butt kicked by Indiana, which is a rivalry game. Like, most people don't know that, but there's a trophy for that game. So what if you get your butt kicked there too? Do you even show up to the last three at Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers? All three of those games are theoretically winnable, but are you in the mindset to go and win those games? And I love my friends who are Michigan State grads. I enjoy talking ball with them, watching Purdue Michigan State games, but they will admit their fans are fair weather. And if it's not looking good by the middle of November, is Spartan Stadium really going to be that rocking for a Friday night game against Purdue? So I'm not playing this number because I think the 5 is, there's a lot of volatility. Can they get to a bowl game? Sure, they could. But I think there are probably more ways that they don't. I just don't know exactly where to put them. And I have respect for the Jonathan Smith hire. So I'm not going to play this number, but I'm leaning towards this being a not super fun year that gives way to a lot of optimism, because I think the way that this team gets back to prominence is very clear.
Again, another, just like Rutgers, that last game of the season, a lot of peacock in there November too, I think.
Yeah.
So, Robert, anything interesting on Michigan State, or is this another kind of whatever for you as well?
Yeah, this one is really iffy for me. I really don't like. I think this team will be much improved. I think it's really easy to make a case that even small improvements can have huge impacts, but this team really struggled last year. They actually have a half decent quarterback. I think they also grabbed pulled a recruit, really highly touted recruit as well. But again, he was a slow build at Oregon State. But that being said, though, they were able to figure it out, right? Like, it took them a bit. It took them about 2 years, but then they were really strong. So he definitely has more pieces now and more resources than he had at Oregon State. It's really, I don't know. I could see this team getting to a bowl game, maybe. There is a path there. Obviously, you have Florida Atlantic, you have Maryland, you have Prairie View, you have Boston College, and you have Illinois, Purdue. That's a path to a bowl. There you go. Done. There's bowl. But outside of that, there's not much else. There's like your Michigan. Yeah, maybe they do weird things at Michigan sometimes. That's a rivalry. You're not beating Ohio State. You're not beating Oregon. You're probably not beating Iowa unless Iowa absolutely collapses this year. But there is paths to get to that 5 win. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think he has more resources than he did at Oregon State. So I don't necessarily hate the idea of buying in with him here.
All right. Fair. Wait and see on them. And that wraps it up for part 1. We will see you all in part 2 later this week. Thank you.
Do you want to just stop it?
Yeah, let's just stop it since